Welcome to Political Education for Freedom podcast. This goes in conjunction with the website politicaleducationforfreedom.org. Here, where we uncover the untold stories of the civil rights era. I'm your host, Nitra, an educator and history enthusiast from Houston, Texas. Today, we're uncovering a story that history books often overlook. Let's talk about Claudette Colvin, a pioneer who, 9 months before Rosa Parks, refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus. Why isn't her story as well known? Let's explore. Claudette Colvin, a courageous young woman whose stand against segregation predates the more famous act of Rosa Parks. Why has history largely overlooked her story? Let's delve into her background, the pivotal incident, and its lasting impact. Claudette Colvin was born on September 5, 1939 in Montgomery, Alabama. Growing up in the segregated South, she experienced the harsh realities of racial discrimination from a young age. As a teenager, she was a bright student with a deep interest in Black history, a subject that inspired her growing awareness of racial injustices. On March 2nd, 1955, 15-year-old Claudette Colvin was riding a city bus in Montgomery. When the bus driver ordered her to give up her seat to a white passenger, she refused, citing her constitutional rights. This act of defiance occurred 9 months before Rosa Parks' similar act of resistance. Colvin was arrested and charged with disturbing the peace, violating segregation laws, and assaulting a police officer. Her bold stand against segregation was one of the first of its kind and sparked discussions within the African American community in Montgomery. Several factors contributed to Claudette Colvin's story being overshadowed. At the time, civil rights leaders were cautious about rallying around a teenager. Additionally, Colvin became pregnant shortly after the incident, which in the context of the 1950s led to concerns about public perception and the effectiveness of her case as a symbol for the movement. Despite these challenges, Colvin's act was not in vain. She was one of the 4 plaintiffs in the Browder v. Gale case, which ultimately led the Supreme Court to declare Montgomery's segregated bus system unconstitutional. Colvin's story is a powerful reminder that Colvin's story is a powerful reminder of the role that young, courageous individuals played in the civil rights movement. Her stand against injustice, though not as widely recognized as a catalyst for change, and set the stage for future acts of resistance against segregation laws. Claudette Colvin's bravery at such a young age challenges us to reconsider the narratives we often hear about the civil rights movement. Her story underscores the importance of acknowledging all contributors to the struggle for equality, regardless of their age or the recognition they receive. Claudette's bravery at just 15 years old challenges us to think about the young voices that spearhead change. There was discussions about, as I stated earlier, about Claudette Colvin being the front person of the movement as such. But even though they didn't put her story out as they did, like the story with Rosa Parks. Like I said before, she was included in that Supreme Court case. But just think about the time in the 1950s. You had a young 15-year-old, and she was also in high school at the time. I'm not sure if she was a freshman or sophomore. She could have been either. Um, she also got pregnant shortly after, but of course that was her being 15, still in high school. They had issues about using her as a quote unquote spokesperson or a front person for a movement like the Montgomery bus boycott. But she ended up marrying the person she got pregnant for. They stayed together all throughout. Even though there's little known about her story, her act of resistance played a huge part in the protests that followed. You could say that Rosa Parks basically, mimicked the act of defiance that Claudette Colvin showed when she stood up to the entire system, the Montgomery segregated bus system. She stood up to it as a 15-year-old. That shows a lot of courage and bravery, but it also shows that when we do things like that, even though it may feel like we are alone, we are not alone. There's always someone with us. And those someones that we can think about is our ancestors. And that actually just lead me to one of the things that Claudette Colvin said afterwards. In so many words, she said that she felt, I believe, Sojourner Truth on one shoulder and Harriet Tubman on the other shoulder, pushing her down in that seat, which was her way of resisting, them holding her back not to get up. But it also gave her the strength to know that she had two strong ancestors on side of her, even though she was walked out of that bus being arrested. She wasn't alone. Now let's shift to the organizational geniuses behind the scenes, people like Ella Baker, a key strategist in the civil rights movement. Now I hear Ella Baker's name now, but imagine me, 15, in high school, had never heard of Ella Baker, although I had been taught about the civil rights era all throughout high school and middle school. Middle school, it was a requirement. But there was only a few names that we were taught about for this era. We also actually were taught, it wasn't even taught in eras. If you can believe the way that they break down the eras in school now, in the way that they teach it. But they kind of separate it now. So high school you get, or middle school, at least in Texas, middle school you get the first part of U.S. history. And it's, I believe it's from 1776 on up to 1865. It ends at the Reconstruction period. And then you get the second part of it, and that's in the 8th grade. You get the second part of it in high school, which goes from Reconstruction in the U.S. on up into, right now, current events. And I'm pretty sure the history books right now probably stop around Barack Obama's presidency. They actually added that to one of the history books. I know this because I have a few. I'm a history teacher. I also teach 8th grade history in Texas. So I kind of have an idea of what's being taught in middle school and high school as far as history. But uh, so the last part, well, the last part that even though it's being taught, we teach it based on the time frame. We start off, of course, in the beginning, 1776, the discovery of the lands, things like that, and then, of course, the time period ends at Reconstruction era, but it's not taught in that way. It's not taught chronologically. Um, a lot of times we have to do a lot of skipping around because we can't fit all of the material in one school year. So typically we kind of skip around to the stuff that we know is going to be on a test or on a district level assessment or even something that has to be tested, that's given by, created by the teachers. I myself like to create my own assessments because I think, assessments shouldn't be, kids shouldn't be sitting down taking 20 question tests every week. It should be in, short chunks for them to digest it all. It's a bunch of names, dates, and events, dealing with history. It's not just, numbers. 1 + 1 is 2. None of that. It's a lot of historical landmarks, a lot of historical events. And normally when they're tested based on the dates and the event. And so that's how we teach it. And it's not taught in a chronological order. So in me thinking about how I learned about the civil rights era, I didn't learn about the things that led to the civil rights era. And at some point we went from the civil rights era to the Civil War and then Reconstruction. And so teaching it that way can kind of garble it up in your head because you think Civil War, civil rights, and I've seen so many kids intertwine those together. It's odd the way the brain works, but it's odd that teachers, let me change that. It's odd that teachers or educators who write these curriculums wouldn't understand that our brains will jumble up Civil War and civil rights. And so you have kids that will say things like, Martin Luther King was around during the Civil War. But it's not them per se. It's because the way that it's taught. And like I said, the very last section of that first part of history, it stops at the Civil War, yet we still have to cover civil rights in that era. So if we look at the time frame, that's in the 1800s. That's 1865 when the Civil War ended. The Civil Rights era didn't happen until the 1960s, and yet we still have to teach both of those. So even though the material is technically stops at in 1865, we still have to teach the Civil Rights era in that part of it. And then what typically happens is when the kids get to high school, they get the second part of it, and then they get another dose of that era, supposedly more detailed. However, I know the material, and it's not as detailed. So it makes complete sense that kids would meld those two eras together. No fault of their own. that's just how the brain works. They're putting civil war and civil rights. It would make a whole lot of sense. So now let's shift a little bit to behind the scenes of the civil rights movement, and let's talk about people like Ella Baker. Now, Claudette Colvin just wanted to go back to the time that this happened. Claudette Colvin, of course, was 15 in 1955, and when she stood up to those bus drivers in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, Ella Baker was a monumental figure in the civil rights movement, whose work with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and beyond left an indelible mark on history. Now, Ella Baker was born in 1903 in Norfolk, Virginia, and grew up in North Carolina. Influenced by her grandmother's stories of slave life, she developed a deep passion for social justice. After graduating as valedictorian from Shaw University in 1927, Baker moved to New York City, immersing herself in social activism. So she graduated valedictorian from Shaw University in 1927. And let's not forget that Claudette Colvin was 15 on that bus in 1955. So Ella Baker was not there yet. Now, in 1940, Baker's journey with the NAACP began. So that was about 15 years before Claudette Colvin was on that bus in Montgomery, which Claudette Colvin would have been a baby, or she would have, not even been born yet. So this is 15 years before when Ella Baker started her career with the NAACP. She served as a field secretary and later as director of branches. Her travels across the South were pivotal in organizing local branches, recruiting members, and training activists. Baker's grassroots approach emphasized local leadership and direct action, empowering communities to fight for their rights. Now, Baker's role took a turn in 1957 when she joined the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, also known as SCLC, led by Martin Luther King Jr. And this SCLC, she also was a part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was formed in 1960. I just have a feeling that this was some teachers who came up with these names, because they just shortened them up. You had the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC. That sounds like a teacher acronym. And then you had SNCC, SNCC. Short for SNCC. So, as executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, she worked closely with King, but often advocated for a more collective leadership approach differing from the SCLC's hierarchical structure. Now, the year 1960 marked a significant chapter in Baker's life with the formation of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Orchestrating a meeting at Shaw University, she encouraged students to form their own organization. Baker's philosophy of participatory democracy shaped SNCC, emphasizing a democratic grassroots approach over charismatic leadership. The philosophy led to impactful campaigns like the Freedom Rides and voter registration drives in the Deep South. Now, of course, we know charismatic leadership, that's one leader, that's everybody getting behind this one person. And she really advocated for more collective leadership. And she wanted collective leadership from all different ages, letting everyone have a voice in participating in fighting for their rights or even deciding what rights it is that they should be afforded. Um, Baker's influence bridged the gap between older and younger generations in the civil rights movement, fostering a more inclusive and diverse approach. Her emphasis on grassroots organizing and local leadership development had a profound impact, shaping the movement's direction. Now, I'm thinking about how you had a lot of young activists that were a part of SNCC, also a part of SCLC, student, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. You also had a spillover of all of both of those movements that led to the Black Power movement in the early 60s. And so you had people who were heavily involved in movements like SNCC and SCLC be leaders in the other or later revolutionary movements like the Black Power movement. Stokely Carmichael is one that comes to mind. He was someone that had differing opinions and approaches to nonviolent protests. He didn't necessarily advocate for nonviolent protests. He felt like, if they hit, we should hit back. But also, I think about Stokely Carmichael as being someone who was influential in changing the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's approach or his views on nonviolent movements. And we also know his philosophy around nonviolent action to stand up against oppression was something that was also influenced by Bayard Rustin, who was inspired by Gandhi. And so all these people, they kind of, at some point, all their stories all kind of meld together because it led to some real significant revolutionary change. But if you think about how all of those different ideas and thought processes and different approaches to getting to the same place, how they all kind of came together to lead us to a movement like a Black Power movement. All of those movements and philosophies were necessary for us to get to the point of something like a Black Power movement. So anytime. So it's something that we shouldn't overlook, how all of those people spilled over from one movement to the next, but also bringing something useful to the era that they fought for change for. And Ella Baker's emphasis on grassroots organizing and local leadership development had a profound impact, and it shaped the movement's directions. Her legacy continues to resonate in social justice movements worldwide. Her belief in the power of ordinary people to instigate change remains a guiding principle. After the 1960s, she remained active in various social justice causes until her death in 1986. Well, she passed away in 1986. I was only a year old at the time, influencing not just civil rights but also feminist and labor movements. Ella Baker's life reminds us that beyond every movement, there are unsung heroes whose strategies and philosophies lay the groundwork for change. Her story is a testament to the power of collective action and grassroots organizing. Thank you for joining us and honoring the legacy of Ella Baker, a true heartbeat of the civil rights movement. Ella's work reminds us that the movements aren't just frontline protests, they're also strategic planning and community empowerment. Every local story has the potential to impact the nation. Let's travel to Houston, Texas to uncover a local civil rights event that shaped national conversations. And of course, I'm in Houston, Texas, and a story we're going to talk about today is my alma mater. I graduated from Texas Southern University. And this is something that I learned about not too long ago, about a few months back in researching for this. So, this is about the 1967 TSU Riot. It was a significant event in the history of civil rights and racial tensions in the United States, particularly here in Houston, Texas. Now, me growing up in Houston, Texas, why wouldn't I know this? And why wouldn't I be teaching this? I teach eighth grade U.S. history, and this is a story about U.S. history. It's also a local story. Yet, you can pick up any book, any textbook in a eighth grade middle school Texas history class, Houston, Texas history class, because we do cover Houston in those in eighth grade. I promise you, there is no mention of the TSU riot. And I think that is something that I will now be including in my history lessons around this era. But I think all people should, because I think this would also let the youth know that their actions can leave a lasting change on society and for change wherever they are. And there is some sense of pride when knowing that something that is in history happened where you're located. We never really think about stuff that can happen where we are and how it can change an entire nation. And this was something that did have a significant change in the local area. The incident took place on the campus of Texas Southern University, TSU, a historically black college, and involved a confrontation between students and the Houston police. Now, I have family and friends who actually work for the Houston Police Department right now, and I'm almost certain they have no idea of this incident. The backdrop to the riot included ongoing racial resentments and issues of environmental racism. Had no idea of this. On May 8th, 1967, the death of 11-year-old Victor George, who drowned in a garbage-filled pond at Houston's Holmes Road dump. Now, I know exactly where Holmes Road is. I had no idea there was a dump on that road. If it was or is, it's apparently it's no longer there. This dump, located in a predominantly black neighborhood, was symbolic of the city's policy of placing landfills in segregated areas. Holmes Road is a historic it's a historic area that is still a overwhelmingly black area also, still to this day. In response, TSU students and environmental activists staged a sit-in on May 15th, demanding the closure of the dump, leading to dozens of arrests by Houston police. Now, Holmes Road is, think now it's not near TSU. So the incident of the kid drowning was on May 8th, and they staged the sit-in about a week later. I'm thinking about 1967 and how information traveled, the speed that information traveled at. We did have telephones, of course. I don't think we had call waiting. I don't think we had cell phones then. We definitely did not have social media. And so maybe it took a little while for the information to travel around about the death of Victor George, the 11-year-old. Tensions escalated when the TSU administration responded to students' protests against poor conditions and the removal of the Friends of SNCC chapter from campus by collaborating with police to issue an arrest warrant for a student organizer. Now, remember SNCC, that is Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and these were Friends of SNCC, so I'm assuming that, now I've heard of these different chapters on campuses, Friends of SCLC. I've heard of these historically in reading books about the era. So students demands included better food, lifting early curfews, introduction of engineering and technology courses, of which they have right now to this day, higher faculty salaries, disarmament of campus police, removal of the campus dean from the local draft board, a student court for disciplinary cases, and dropping charges against students activists. On the night of May 16, 1967, Houston police blockaded the TSU campus in response to these civil rights protests. This led to a severe clash. Students threw rocks and bottles at the police, and the police responded by firing an estimated 3,000 to 5,000 rounds into Lanier Dormitory, where students had barricaded themselves. The police raid resulted in the largest mass arrests in Houston history, with 488 students detained. During the incident, Houston police officer Louis Cuba was killed, and 2 other officers were wounded. The aftermath of the raid saw the arrest of 5 TSU students known as the TSU 5 on charges of inciting a riot, assault, and the murder of Officer Cuba. However, it was later concluded that Cuba likely died from a ricocheting police bullet. Well, if you're firing 3,000 to 5,000 rounds into a dormitory, I mean, come on now. I mean, that is just ridiculous. That's outrageous. 5,000 rounds? Oh, my gosh. In 1970, the charges against the TSU 5 were dismissed due to insufficient evidence. This event highlighted the deep racial divides in Houston and the broader United States during the Civil Rights Movement. The incident led to the establishment of the Community Relations Division in the Houston Police Department in 1968 to foster better dialogue and relations with the community. The TSU riot remains a poignant reminder of the struggles and resistance against systemic racism and police violence. Wow. I'm just thinking about now in Houston Police Department, they have something that is called PAL officers, which are they are community officers that are located in certain areas. All the officers are assigned to an area and a school district, and they usually have different programs about leadership and police. And now I actually know a PAL officer personally. A good friend of mine that we grew up with. We know a PAL officer who was our PAL officer growing up. We knew him in the community. He's now the chief of police now of Houston Police Department. He's the chief now. He was a PAL officer. We know him on a first name basis. He was very, very involved in the community, and not I knew him personally, but I didn't know him from a school campus. I knew him from the neighborhood apartments. He was one of the officers that patrolled the area, and he had played a significant role in my mom's life, my brother's. He knew my mom on a first name basis. My brother had got into some stuff, and he was one of the officers that was there that told the other officers, or he gave a command to the other officers to put down their weapons, to not shoot, because he knew my brother. He actually said, "I know that kid." They were just some stuff had happened with my uncle, a story for another day. But my brother just ran around the corner. We stayed in the same apartments with my uncle, and my brother ran around the corner to check up on my uncle because we hadn't seen him in a while. And he noticed some glass was broken and the window was broken, and my brother was standing out there, picking up the glass, trying to figure out, like, where's my uncle? Why is the window broken? And officers, about 10 or 15 officers, just all they just all came out of nowhere, screaming commands to my brother. "Freeze, move, don't move, put it down, don't move, put it down." And he had glass in his hand, and he put his hands up, dropped the glass, and it splattered and broke everywhere. And that was the glass he was picking up from the floor, from the ground, from the window. And every single officer, I think he said it was about 15 officers all surrounding the apartment, but he was on the second floor. They were all down on, ground level. And he just looked around. I think he said he didn't turn around, but he looked around, moved his head around, and he saw about 10 or 15 officers, all with their guns pointed at him. And he saw all kind of guns. He said he saw shotguns. He saw, just hand weapons. He saw every kind of weapon you can think of. And this is from him just taking a short glance. Mind you, my brother played basketball, so he was very much aware of peripheral vision. He could see with slightly moving. But they were all surrounding him with their guns drawn, pointed towards him. And he said he remembered hearing someone say, "Wait, that's a kid." And he said, "Yeah, I'm a kid. I think he was 13 or 14. He said, "I'm 13 or something." He just screamed out, I'm a kid. I'm only 13." And he heard an officer say, "Wait, hold your fire. Wait, I know that kid. I know that kid." And he heard officer walk up the stairs, come up behind him. My brother was frozen. He did not move. And the police officer came up and he said, where apartment you stay in?" And my brother told him, "I stay around the corner in 1701. That was our apartment number. He said, "I stay around the corner in 1701. He said, "I know you. Are you, I think he either called my mom Niecy or Cynthia. I don't remember. I think he said Niecy. Are you Niecy's boy?" And he said, "Yeah, that's my mom." And he said, "Okay, come with me." And he said, I'm put you in handcuffs because we standing up. We've been watching this apartment. We've been waiting on people coming in and out. He said, "I'm going to put you in handcuffs and put you in the back of the car, and I'm going to take you around to your mom." And my brother was just frozen. He was just like, "Okay." And my mom, he drove him around in the police car. My brother was in the back seat in handcuffs. He brought him to my mom. He knocked on the door. Thank God my mom was there. I don't know why she was there. I don't remember. Because she's normally at work. But that time she wasn't at work because she sent my brother around there because she hadn't heard from my uncle. So she told my brother, "Go around there and see if your uncle is there. He's not answering the phone and I haven't heard from him." So she was there. He brought him back home. And we were inside the house, but we all came out and peeked our head out the door. And I think I was looking out the window like, what the fuck is this? What happened? Somebody's delivering my brother to my mom in a police car. And we saw my brother get out. And we saw the officer remove the handcuffs from my brother. My brother had his head down, had his eyes closed. He just could not look up. And the officer took the handcuffs off him and he just patted him on the shoulder. He said, "It's okay, man. I'm bringing you home. You going home. It's all right. You going home." And my brother just started crying like, I wasn't doing nothing. And of course, we just saw the police bringing him home. And we just knew my brother did something. And, of course, we his younger siblings, so we just like, "Oh, he in trouble." Like, the police came, and the police don't normally come around to our house. And so just us seeing that, that was something that was a really, really big deal. But it was also different because we just knew that he was in trouble. But he brought him around, brought him back home, and he gave my mom his card. And he said, "If you have any problems or you have any issues, just give me a call. If he get into any trouble or anything, give me a call." And my mom kept his card, and he said, "I'll be checking up on him, make sure he all right and he not into no trouble or nothing." And she was like, "Okay." And my mom was so apologetic. She was like, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I didn't know. I sent him around there." She was just so distraught over that because when my brother told her about what happened, which the officer also explained to my mom what happened. He told her, like, "Yeah, we had guns pointed at him. If he moved, we would have shot him. And he told my mom he didn't move. He stood, put his hands up, and when he put his hands up, he dropped the glass. And I think the most he did was move his feet back or his leg back because he had on shorts for to avoid the glass, kind of popping up on his legs. But that's the most he did. But my brother did not move. And even after he came home, he came in, sat on the sofa, and of course, we is the younger sister, so we just want to know, like, what happened? Like, how did you get in the back of a police car? Like, what went on? Like, what was it like? They had you in handcuffs? Was the handcuffs tight? And he just kind of sobbed and cried, and he was like, "That why do you want to know that?" Like, it was just so weird to him. He was like, "Why y'all want to know? I didn't have fun, if that's what you want to know." He's like, "That wasn't fun. I didn't want to be back there. There was no knobs on the door." He was kind of telling us how it was when he was in the back seat. He was like, "My hands was behind my back. There was no knobs on the door. I couldn't jump out." And he was just like, "Why y'all want to know?" And my mom was like, "Well, we want to know." She's like, "Well, I want to know because it's my fault that you were around there." And she said, "And they need to know so that they know what not to do and how not to act or react when they see police or they are, around police or they get in trouble or something." And he was just like, "I don't know." He was like, he told my mom the whole story, and he said, "I heard somebody say, 'Wait, that's a kid. I know that kid.'" And he said, it is his belief that if that PAL officer, who's now the chief of police, who used to be a PAL officer, if that PAL officer wasn't in the area and, walked throughout the neighborhood and didn't know my brother, he probably would have gotten shot that day, or he would have, been sitting up in a jail cell waiting to call us to let us know that he's been in jail this whole time. I mean, he kind of didn't have no idea what could have came of that. But just the relationship with the PAL officers in the neighborhood made a big difference in what happened to my brother that day. And I'm just thinking about this incident that happened in 1967 and how in 1968 they created the Community Relations Division in the Houston Police Department. And I'm just wondering if that had a significant change in the establishment of community relations divisions in the police department. It seems as if there could be a connection with the community relations division and the PAL officers that are in the neighborhood. And they still have these officers here right now to this day. And so this history from Houston shows how local actions contribute to the national fabric of history. A connection that I had no idea that I didn't know that, or couldn't have known that I would have been somehow connected to that right now to this day. So today we've journeyed through hidden chapters of the Civil Rights era. These stories remind us that history is not just made by widely recognized figures, but also by everyday heroes. Join me next time on Hidden Voices. Until then, keep exploring and uncovering the stories that shape our world. Thank you for listening.